Mr. Chairman, staff is ready to begin the meeting when you are.
Okay, I'm going to call the Construction Board of Adjustment Appeals special meeting for Tuesday, March 30th, 2021 to order. Teresa, are we in compliance with the Freedom of Information Act?
We'll turn this up, Andrew.
Yes, sir, we are.
Okay, number 3 on the agenda is swearing in ceremony for new and reappointed commissioners, performed by Chris Yates, myself, and Doug Pine.
Good afternoon.
Hey, Chris.
Please enter your meeting ID or audio code followed by the pound or hash sign.
Okay. At this time, I'd like to swear in.
Please enter your meeting ID or audio code followed by the pound or hash sign.
I'd like to swear in J.R. Owen and Doug O. Pine. The terms are from July 1st, 2019 through 6/30/2023. And for J. Owen and Doug Pine, it's 7/1/2019 through 6/30/2023. I guess we missed the last swearing in, so we're going to get caught up today. If you guys wouldn't mind repeating after me as I read the oath. I do solemnly swear that I am duly qualified.
I do solemnly swear
that I am duly qualified.
According to the Constitution of the state.
According to the Constitution of the state.
To exercise the duties of the office to which I have been appointed.
To exercise the duties of the office to which I have been appointed.
And that I will.
And that I will.
And that I will.
To the best of my ability.
To the best of my ability.
Discharge the duties thereof.
Discharge the duties thereof.
Discharge the duties thereof.
And preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of this state and of the United States.
And preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of this state and of the United States.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Thank you, gentlemen. You're now sworn in.
Thank you.
Okay, the next subject on our agenda is the election of a chairman and vice chairman. Would anybody like to make a motion to nominate a board member to serve as chairman for the new term?
I'd nominate Jay to be the chairman.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Are there any additional nominations for the office of chairman? Hearing none, Teresa, call the roll.
Mr. O'Key? Mr. O'Key, are you in favor or against the motion?
You here?
I do see Mr. O'Key on the screen here. Mr. O'Key, if you could try to dial into the meeting, we're having trouble hearing you. While he does that, Mr. Chairman, I'll move on to the next member. Mr. Graves? Mr. Graves, I see you're muted on your end. If you could unmute and respond. Mr. Graves, I see you're unmuted now.
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Guidabono?
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. May?
You're muted, Randy.
Mr. May, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Yes, I can.
Are you in support of Mr. Owen as chairman?
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Gordon?
Yes.
Mr. Nix? Mr. Nix? I see Mr. Nix is unmuted. I'm not sure. We could circle back to Mr. Nix. Mr. Pine?
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Lyons?
Yes.
And we'll try Mr. O'Key. Are you with us?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
In favor.
Thank you. And Mr. Nix, are you with us? Mr. Chairman, we do have enough for a majority vote on that. If you'd like to
Okay.
move on to the next item.
All right, would anyone like to make a motion to nominate a board member to serve as vice chairman for the new term? I'll nominate Neil Gordon. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Any additional nominations for the office of vice chairman? Hearing none, Teresa, call the roll, please.
Certainly. Mr. O'Key?
In favor.
Mr. Graves?
Aye.
Mr. Guidabono?
In favor?
Mr. May?
In favor?
Mr. Gordon?
Yes.
Mr. Nix?
In favor.
Mr. Pine?
In favor.
Mr. Lyons?
In favor.
Mr. Owen?
Yes.
Won't touch it.
Okay, Teresa, do we need to do a overall roll call then?
Yes, sir. I can begin with that. Mr. O'Key?
Here.
Mr. Graves?
Here.
Mr. Guidabono?
Here.
Mr. May?
Here.
Mr. May, if you have two devices active right now, you want to make sure one of them is muted and one is unmuted. Sometimes that's where the feedback comes from. Mr. Gordon?
Here.
Mr. Nix?
Here.
Mr. Pine?
Here.
Mr. Lyons?
Here.
Mr. Owen?
Here.
Mr. Ellis and Mr. Zinn are excused from the meeting.
Okay, now we come to the agenda. Does the staff have any changes to the agenda?
No, sir, not at this time.
Okay, can I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, Teresa, you can call the roll for that.
Thank you. Mr. O'Key?
In favor.
Mr. Graves?
In favor?
Mr. Guidabono,
In favor?
Mr. May,
In favor.
Mr. Gordon,
In favor.
Mr. Nick,
Muted, Joe.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
yes, sir.
In favor.
Mr. Pine,
In favor.
Mr. Lyons,
In favor.
Mr. Owen.
In favor.
Thank you.
Okay, now we need to have an approval of our minutes of our November 26, 2019 meeting.
So moved.
Motion's been made to approve them. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, Teresa, you can call a roll.
Mr. O'Keefe,
Approved.
Seconded.
Mr. Graves,
Approved.
Mr. Guidabono,
Approved.
Mr. May, Mr. May,
Approved.
Approved.
thank you. Mr. Gordon,
Approved.
Mr. Nick,
Approved.
Mr. Pine,
Approved.
Mr. Lyons,
Approved.
Mr. Owens.
Approved. Okay, now we're to citizens' comments. Do we have any citizens' comments, Teresa?
No, sir, we do not.
All right. There's no unfinished business, so we'll go into new business, which is the Harbor Master Office variance. Sherry, do you want to make a brief presentation, please?
Yes, sir. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. This is Sherry Mendrick, the floodplain administrator for the town of Hilton Head Island. Sea Pines Resort has submitted an application for a proposed redevelopment of the property that contains the quarter deck restaurant, which previously housed the harbor master office. As part of the redevelopment, they are not only going to rebuild the restaurant, but they would like to build the harbor master office as a separate detached office. The Municipal Code Section 15.9-312B states that non-residential construction must be elevated so that the lowest floor is located no lower than 2 feet above the base flood elevation or 11 feet above mean sea level, whichever is higher. But Municipal Code Section 15.9-411B states that if the development is necessary to conduct a functionally dependent use, provided that all other criteria of the municipal code are met, and no other reasonable alternatives exist, and the development is protected by methods to minimize flood damage and creates no additional threat to public safety, the applicant may apply for a variance. Based on the criteria outlined in the ordinance and the information provided by the applicant, staff recommends that the Construction Board of Adjustments and Appeals approve the application based on the findings of facts and conclusions contained in the staff report. And that is all I have for you today, sir.
I'm sorry, Sherry, what was that last statement you made?
And that is all I have for you today, sir. The staff does support approval of the variance.
Okay, question by board members. I have one. Previously, when there's been projects with the flood elevation.
None here.
Previously, when there's been issues with the finished floor being below flood elevation, it affects our community rating. Is that going to be an issue here?
In this particular case, Mr. Chairman, this will not, we do have to report it as a variance that was allowed. But in this case, FEMA does allow for a couple of exemptions to that lowest floor requirement, one of them being a functionally dependent use. And that is a use that has to be carried out in close proximity to water.
Okay, does anybody else have any questions for Sherry? Hearing none.
I do not.
Hearing none, we'll have the applicant make a presentation.
Hi, this is Isabella Kleitz, part of the Hart-Howerton Architecture and Landscape and Interiors team, working on the quarterdeck and the harbor master's office. I'm on with Cliff McMacken and David Rao, and we're happy to answer any specific questions. Sherry said it pretty well, but we're happy to fill in any other of the gaps if there are more specifics we should talk to. Would it be best if I shared plans? Having never done this before, just tell me what would be the best way to go through this.
Let's do it. This is David Rao. I'm principal at Hart-Howerton, the architects. Isabella, perhaps put up the, if you're able to share the site plan, and we can talk to that. I think briefly, in the interest of this group, the harbor master is an important, really public safety function that happens at the harbor. It does require proximity, both physically and line of sight, to the open water. It also needs proximity to the fuel pumps. The configuration of the new building that's replacing the existing building demands that finished floor level will be raised from the existing finished floor level to meet current codes, which would put this function further away from the water, both vertically and horizontally. It would also compromise access by visiting boaters, the public. They do conduct business related to the harbor inside the harbor master's office. It would impact the ability of the disabled to participate in that function. So the site that we've proposed here is really, after a pretty exhaustive search, the one that provides I guess accommodates all those criteria in the best way. So we have a position where the open water can be seen, the channel, boats coming through the channel can be seen, the harbor itself can be seen. They can keep and that goes to its public safety function. The fuel pumps are right within line of sight and just a couple steps away. They do service those fuel pumps. So all of that is sort of driving this location. We've designed the building to be as diminutive as possible. I believe it's about 300 square feet. It's in an octagonal shape, which we think, really would minimize its disruption to the site in any sort of water flow that would come on land. It certainly would not impact or jeopardize any neighbors by its presence there. It would be flood-proof construction, so in the event of an impending storm, it would be battened down. And I think the other thing is we are accommodating other aspects of the regulations. This is the level change is the only variance that we're requesting. But in other respects, the building will meet the building codes and other codes.
Does anybody have any questions?
How high? What's the difference between what it is, what it was, and what it would have to be to come up to code? And do we know if it flooded last time we had a hurricane?
It's currently at the finished floor elevation of the existing restaurant, or well, it's been demolished, but that was at about 8.5 feet. And our finished the seashell path that's wrapping around the edge of the seawall is at about 6.5 or 7 feet. So this proposed new harbor master location is at 8.5 feet, so about 18 or 24 inches above the seashell path, and it's at the same height as it currently is or was, and the required finished floor elevation for flood would be 11 feet. So it's at 8.5.
Yep. And this is Cliff McMacken with Sea Pines Resort. I can answer the second question there, is that during Matthew and Irma, neither one of those flood events did we get water at that elevation.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's why we have the confidence, just from a practical standpoint, to choose this elevation.
Okay,
Any
thank
other
you.
questions? Jerry, is there anything additional that you want to say?
No, sir, not at this time.
Anything from the applicant? Any additional statements from the applicant?
Nothing more from us. Thank you.
Okay, so comes time for us to have a motion and a second. Does someone want to make a motion with regard to the application for a variance?
I move that the application for the variance be approved as submitted.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Okay, Teresa, back to work. Call the roll.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, for clarification, who made the motion and who was the seconder? If you could identify yourself. I'm not able to see the screen at this time.
Joe Nix made the motion.
Thank you.
Neil Gordon seconded.
Thank you. Okay. Roll call, Mr. O'Key,
Approved.
Mr. Graves,
Approved.
Mr. Guidabono,
Approved.
Mr. May,
Approved.
Mr. Gordon,
Approved.
Mr. Nix,
Approved.
Mr. Pine,
Approved.
Mr. Lyons,
Approved.
Mr. Owen.
Approved.
Motion carries unanimously.
So I don't understand this next one, review of proposed changes to the rules of procedure.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, this is, pardon me, this is Sherry Mendrick again, the floodplain administrator for the town of Hilton Head Island. Actually, this was a change as a result of some ordinance changes that were actually approved by town council back in 2019 as a result of a community assistance visit. And we really don't see a lot of floodplain variances or anything like that come up with the Construction Board of Adjustment and Appeals. However, we did recognize that from the 2019 code change, some of the code change sections did vary from what was originally in the rules of procedure for the CBAA. So this is a request to change those code sections in the rules of procedure for your operations. And it's just the change, the codes are still basically the same for variances, a little bit more defined, but it's to reestablish the proper code sections that the rules and procedures point to out of the municipal code.
What are you looking for from us?
Teresa, correct me if I'm wrong, but if there's a change to the rules of procedures, you guys do need to review the change and approve it. Is that correct, Teresa?
Yes, Sherry, that's correct.
So we'll take a roll then for these proposed changes.
Mr. Chairman, if we could have a motion and a second on the rules, the rule changes.
A motion to accept the changes of the rules of procedure. I'd like to
I'll
make
second it.
Thanks.
Do we know who made the motion and seconded for the record?
Yes, sir. I have
Okay.
Mr. Gordon making the motion and Mr. Pine seconding.
Correct.
Okay, then we have a roll call.
Yes, sir. Mr. O'Key,
Approved.
Mr. Graves,
Approved.
Mr. Guidabono,
Approved.
Mr. May,
Approved.
Mr. Gordon,
Approved.
Mr. Nix,
Approved.
Mr. Pine,
Approved.
Mr. Lines,
Approved.
Mr. Owen.
Approved. So the next item, I don't understand either, the applicant rebuttal. Is there any reason for the applicant to make any statements here?
Mr.
Hearing none.
Chairman, I see item number 11 next, under commission business, the adoption of the 2021 meeting schedule.
I'm on the wrong page, I'm sorry.
That's okay. I'm on page 6.
Okay, so we have a meeting schedule proposed for 2021. Is there a
I make
motion
a motion to approve. Neil Gordon.
Thank you.
Is there a second?
Second the motion.
You get
I
that,
believe
Teresa?
that was, yes, Mr. Nix.
Yes, that was.
Correct.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, then we have another roll call.
Yes, sir. Mr. O'Key,
Approved.
Mr. Graves,
Aye.
Mr. Guidabono,
Approved.
Mr. May,
Approved.
Mr. Gordon,
Approved.
Mr. Nix,
Approved.
Mr. Pine,
Approved.
Mr. Lines,
Approved.
Mr. Owen.
Approved. Okay, number 12 is the chairman's report. I have nothing to add. Are there any committee reports? Hearing none. Mr. Yates, is there anything that you'd like to report?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Not at this time, thank you.
Okay, moving on to adjournment. If there's no other business before the meeting board, do we need a second or a motion to adjourn?
No, sir, we do not.
Okay, with no other business before the board, the meeting is hereby adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.